Hello guys, my name is Taylor, and today's topic is going to be about the California grizzly bear, specifically Ursus Magister. Now, Ursus Magister is a subspecies of the California grizzly bear, but Ursus Magister is the bear that lived all throughout Southern California. Now, before we get started, make sure to go to my buddy's page, Chase McIntyre, and check out the movie Island of Darkness that we made. That is ChaseMcIntyre, Island of Darkness movie. Great movie. We had a lot of fun doing it, so be sure to go check that out. Now, the California grizzly bear, or Ursus Magister of Southern California, was probably the biggest bear that has ever existed in modern times. Now, the California grizzly bear did go extinct around in 1924. That's when the last one was seen in Sequoia National Forest. So it's been about about 100 years now. So Ursus Magister was the subspecies of the California grizzly, because there was actually multiple different subspecies. Off the top of my head, I know that there was Ursus arctos californicus, and that is the grizzly that primarily lived in central and northern California. But Ursus Magister was the variation that lived in Southern California. And this was an absolutely huge bear. We are talking about 1,500 to 2,000 pounds for Ursus Magister. I mean, this is an incredibly, incredibly huge bear. I mean, we are talking about a bear that is bigger than a modern day Kodiak bear. I mean, they've all been around for a very long time, but if you compare, I mean, a Kodiak bear was smaller than Ursus Magister, and then a lot of California grizzlies. The California grizzly bear was very abundant through California from ancient times all the way up until about 1924, when the last one was seen. Now, for those of you that live in Thousand Oaks, or let's say those of you that live from around San Simeon all the way down through Santa Barbara and down through Thousand Oaks, Camarillo, and into Malibu, Los Angeles, those areas, and all the way down to San Diego. The biggest bear that has existed in modern times used to live in all those areas, and that was Ursus Magister. So, and the reason this bear got so big, and in particular the California grizzly bear, because the other subspecies as well were big, but Ursus Magister was the biggest of all the subspecies that lived in California. The reasons these bears in California got so big was because of the abundance of life. Before the cities started getting built, before ranches started getting put up, there was a plentiful bounty of food for this bear. And even for the natives that lived in California, it was what I guess you could call a wildlife paradise. It was like a Garden of Eden in California. So the California grizzly, and I'm including in this, of course, Ursus Magister, which I probably said a lot already, but the California grizzly bear had an abundance. I mean, there was not, I mean, when you're on land, of course, and got lost there for a minute. Particularly in California, there was an abundance of oak trees. Now, these oak trees produce a lot of acorns, a lot. Even in Southern California, for example, the Chumash and the Tongva used to gather up all these acorns, and they used to have big stores of them in their villages to feed the village. And the California grizzly bear ate these acorns too, and this is why the California grizzly bear was so huge and so big. One of the reasons. I mean, there was an abundance. There wasn't just the acorns and the oak trees. There was elk, there was deer, There was ground squirrels. There were lots of different types of rodents that lived in California, that still live in California. There was roots that the bears like to dig up. And the California grizzly bears were also known for having extremely long claws, even longer than the Kodiaks or the grizzlies of the lower 48. And they were very good at digging up these roots. And in the olden days, explorers spoke of seeing these bears like in troops. There was groups of these bears out in the fields digging up roots and even feasting under the oak trees on the acorns. I mean, that's what these bears got fat, and they got big, and they were ferocious. And this is what the Spanish talk about, that these bears were very, very ferocious, and they were very, very, very hard to kill when they went after them. Because, of course, the time that the grizzly started to decline, although not too much, was during the Spanish and Mexican colonial periods. And then during the American period is when it really, really skyrocketed because of the overhunting. And also during the Spanish and Mexican periods, there wasn't enough people of European or Hispanic descent that were living in California to even do damage to the grizzlies at all. In fact, actually, during the Mexican period is when the grizzlies numbers actually went up, because they had been feasting on cattle for a long time since the arrival of the Spanish, because the Spanish brought the cattle with them. But not only were there these animals in California that the California grizzly feasted on, as well down on the coasts. And online, yes, they do talk about how the California grizzly used to feed on beached whale carcasses. Sebastian Vizcaíno, a Spanish explorer coming to California in 1602, speaks of at night, when he had his ship anchored at the bay, of seeing California grizzlies and hearing them on the beach feeding on a whale carcass. So, yes, they fed on whale carcasses occasionally when they washed up on shore. Elephant seals, just like today, used to visit California. So the California grizzly bear would have fed on elephant seals as well. I'm not sure if they would have gone after a large male elephant seal, because they are huge and they are extremely ferocious themselves. It might be too much for a California grizzly. I mean, a male elephant seal is a lot. But I'm sure they would have went after the females and the young as well. But and in fact, actually, during the olden days, there were elephant seals. The California grizzlies did feed on them, but there weren't as many as there are now, because back during those days, the grizzlies were so abundant along the coastline of California that the elephant seals knew this, and they didn't arrive as much as they do now, like how they're in these giant groups now. But yes, sea life. I'm sure even sea lions were on the menu if the grizzlies were down there, because, like I'm saying, and you can't say it enough, the California grizzly was all over the landscape of California. And going back to the biggest of them all, Ursus Magister. Ursus Magister was the biggest. So like I said, for those of you who live from San Simeon all the way down to San Diego, there used to be a bear that lived there that was the biggest of all of them. That was the biggest bear in the entire world in modern history, which is Ursus Magister. And a lot of people don't know, of course. I mean, the grizzly is on the state flag, and most people don't even know. I've been getting into this for quite some time now. I've been into the California grizzly, been reading books about the California grizzly for almost 10 years now. And so I've been into it. I know it's becoming a bigger thing now. Very recently, it's all of a sudden people have been finding out about it. Still not a lot of people who know about it. But yeah, if you look at the flag, the bear is on the flag, but people have no clue why there's a grizzly on the flag. But that's why, because the California grizzly used to be the most prominent, I guess you could say, predator that was on the landscape in California. And it was a mighty, mighty beast. So yeah, I mean, and even if you go down to Los Angeles during the olden days, And when I say olden days, I'm talking about, I think I mentioned it before, from ancient times all the way up until around, well, in Los Angeles, yeah, so the 20s, probably the early 20s, late 19 teens. So, but in the olden days in Los Angeles, the LA River used to flood, and it used to be a free-flowing, rapid river, and it was usually filled up by rainstorms or by floods. And the California grizzly bear used to feed along its banks because the LA River used to have Chinook salmon and rainbow trout in it. So you used to find grizzlies along the banks of the LA River. Now the LA River is, of course, small and it's dammed up and it looks like shit, but back then it was a free flowing cold river, and there was an abundance of life. And at one point in California, there was also gray wolves. Gray wolves lived right alongside grizzlies in California. Of course, coyotes have always been there, and a lot of mule deer. Lots of elk. The elk used to be all throughout California. In fact, when Francis Drake came to what is now called Point Reyes, me personally, I think that Francis Drake, the landing spot where he came to in California was at Bodega Bay in Northern California. But they do like to talk about Point Reyes. But anyway, when he came to Northern California in the 1500s, Francis Drake, he spoke about when he came inland that he saw elk and deer as far as the eye could see. I mean, as far as the eye could see. And plentiful birds, eagles, condors. And this is what it was like. California was a wildlife paradise. It was a wildlife paradise. And the grizzlies were literally right along the water. So it's incredible to think about because, of course, California is a very different place. Of course, if you go inland to California these days, it's still very sparse. There's a lot of wilderness, but, and you got deer, you got black bears. Black bears have always been in California. It's just in the olden days, they were kept to the mountains because they wouldn't go near the grizzlies. The grizzlies had all the prime territory. And, but yeah, I know I'm going all over the place here with talking about this, but it is a fascinating subject. So yeah, so now in California, and it might already be happening. They are possibly going to be reintroducing the California grizzly bear back into California. So this is big. I mean, I don't know how that'll go. It's not the olden days anymore. It could be very dangerous. It could work out well, but it could also be very dangerous because the thing is, even if they re-release the California grizzly bear into Yosemite or into somewhere in the Sierras like they talk about, I mean, it still could be dangerous. It would be cool. I'm not going to lie. It would be cool to see California grizzly bears out there again. And if they can do it the right way, then I think that's great. But as far as the prime habitat for the grizzlies in California, despite them being everywhere pretty much in California, except except mostly the desert areas, the prime habitat for the California grizzly was the coastline, was the coast. So, I mean, Malibu, Santa Monica, San Pedro, San Diego, San Simeon up north, Santa Barbara, all those areas were the prime habitat for the bears. And all those places that I just named, that was the home of the bear that I mentioned at the beginning, the subspecies Ursus Magister, the biggest of the grizzlies, not only in North America, but also in the world in modern times. So, yeah, we're a huge bear that inhabited all these places now that are very populated. And when a lot of people think about California, they think about it as a place of the future. They don't think so far back to its past all the time. And so that's why when people see Los Angeles, it's hard for them to take away all the buildings and take away everything, to imagine it being more of like a prairie that led up to the mountains, and it was full of plentiful game, and there were grizzlies, elk, deer, wolves. Even the beaver used to live along the banks of the LA River, and even in other parts of California. So very, very different from what people think it is now. And Southern California in particular was the prime habitat for these bears. That's why the biggest subspecies of them lived there. It was the prime habitat. I mean, you would have seen, the coast of Malibu used to be flower beds going all the way down to the ocean, and you would have seen grizzly bears rolling around in those flower beds. A town, if anybody knows about it, called Thousand Oaks in California was what would have been the prime habitat for large bears. But yeah, they started to dwindle, and by the time of the 20s, they were gone. But there's all kinds of stories on that you can read about the Spanish and Mexican encounters with the grizzlies in the early colonial period, and also a lot of encounters during the American period as well, when the miners were coming. A lot of people were coming from back east. The Americans were coming from the east and into California during the gold rush, and that's when the end of the grizzly was near. It didn't take very long, but that's what happens. Of course the government was sending out people to eradicate these bears. I mean, this is a no-brainer. They were sending people out to eradicate these bears and poison them, do whatever they had to. But also, with all the people that were coming into California, the grizzly bear did not have a chance at that point. I mean, they were very dangerous. They're ferocious, and the miners usually protected themselves from these bears, or at least tried to. But extremely fascinating. And Ursus Magister is the king of the bears in modern history. It is the biggest bear. And some of you might say, yeah, the polar bear, but in body size, maybe in height the polar bear, might be, but Ursus Magister was probably pretty close to the height of a polar bear. A big polar bear can get up to about 11 and 12 feet. Ursus Magister was about that height, but the girth of Ursus Magister was enormous. Like I said, a 2,000-pound bear. Now, I'm not saying all of them got to 2,000 pounds, but I'm saying between 1,500 and 2,000 pounds. It is an absolutely gigantic, ferocious, scary bear. But let me tell you something. Seeing them in old California, if you were to go back in time and seeing them in the flower beds and on a sunny day and out in the meadows, would have been a beautiful thing. It would have been something out of a Walt Disney picture. Maybe that's where they got the ideas with all those, the bears and in the flower beds and all that. So, incredible thing to think about. But this was my video about the California grizzly bear, specifically Ursus Magister. And thank you very much for watching. And it's a pleasure to talk about these things, especially more unknown history like this. So thank you very much. And again, hit that like button and subscribe, and check out our video that I mentioned at the beginning, The Island of Darkness. Thank you guys very much.